Do you have a faulty gas gauge on your Saab 9.3? If so, today I'm going to show you how to fix it. A faulty gas gauge in this car is a pretty common problem, and it's caused by the fuel level sender going bad. The fuel level sender, which attaches to the side of your fuel pump basket, essentially moves up and down as your fuel level in the tank rises and falls. And over time, these contacts tend to wear out, which is what causes a gas light to come on. The first thing we need to do is drop the gas tank. There is no access to the fuel pump from the top of the car, but trust me, as you'll see, dropping the gas tank is actually pretty easy. A couple of things to keep in mind before we start. First off, if you're replacing your fuel level sender, it's a great time to also replace your fuel pump. Unfortunately, OEM fuel pumps, depending on your model, may or may not be available. When I say OEM, I mean a genuine Saab or a Saab supplier fuel pump. With that in mind, a lot of people generally replace with aftermarket parts. I did that on my car a few months ago. I'll link the video in the top corner if you want to see. Long story short, and through no fault of the fuel pump, I ended up having problems later. We'll discuss that, and we'll also discuss why I'm just replacing the sender and not the whole basket and fuel pump. Last thing I will mention is, since we do need to drop the tank, I highly recommend driving the car till it's pretty low on gas. I currently have about 1/8 a tank of gas, maybe a little bit more. So the fuel tank shouldn't be incredibly heavy when we need to lower it and raise it back up. Our first step is getting rid of all of the fuel pressure in the system. So the way we're going to do that is start the car. Under the battery cover here, there's a little fuse box. You can unclip these two tabs, and it'll pop right up, and there's a 20 amp fuse that we need to remove. And the car dies almost immediately. And let's just reinstall that fuse before we forget. Removing the fuel tank is going to be pretty similar on any front-wheel drive 9.3, regardless of the year or engine. One thing I will say though, if you have a cross-wheel drive 9.3, you're going to have a drive shaft that likely needs to be removed. If you have a cross-wheel drive car, it might be best to consult Saab WIS online. They have some great step-by-step instructions for jobs like these. To get proper access to drop it down, really the only thing that we need to remove is this piece of our exhaust. If you're interested in the exhaust setup this car has, you can check out the video in the top corner. Now, if your exhaust has not been removed in a very long time on your Saab, I would recommend getting under here probably at least the night before you're going to attempt this job and spray a bunch of PB Blaster in wherever there are joints that need to be removed. There are two exhaust hangers. One is right here. The second one is way in the back. I think I'll leave that one on for now. I don't have a rubber mallet, so I have to use a hammer, and I'm going to put a rag over here to hopefully protect the exhaust pipe a little bit. You might be able to see it in the corner of the frame here, but there's a milk crate holding up this side of the exhaust. We'll need to remove that temporarily to drop the fuel tank, but that's going to help avoid putting strain on the downpipe and the flex pipe and everything up there on the exhaust. Wow, spraying PB Blaster in here really makes a world of a difference. This is just literally sliding out. We're now at the front corner of the fuel tank, and there are 4 things that we need to undo here. There's our feed line, our return line, our wiring harness, and I believe an evap line. This line is zip tied, so I'm just going to cut that to allow a little bit of flexibility. And then the best way to get at these is to get at the underside of them like this. You just want to pry the two sides, or push the two sides up. You can see the top of it now. You can just pull it out a little bit more. There we go. They're hard plastic lines, so you want to be a little careful. The last thing you want to do is stick something in here and pry up, because it is exactly how you break these. They are, as far as I can tell, pretty generic. You might be able to get some at your local auto parts store if you do break them, but try to remove them properly. Unhook this. Unclip this line for a little slack. The two fuel lines use the same type of connector. So I'm just holding that side up with my finger. Finally broke. It was just fighting me and fighting me. Been at it for 20 minutes. It finally just broke. So that's going to be a run to the parts store. Disconnect our wiring harness. We reorient ourselves to the back corner of the tank. You can see right here is where our hose is for the filler neck. I have found it's best to use a screwdriver on there as opposed to a socket. So you can see it's in a bit of a tough area to get to. So I'm going to remove that off camera with a screwdriver. That came off pretty easily. You just got to find the right angle to get the screwdriver in there. And you can get a hand up to kind of stabilize it once it gets loose enough. But this hose will just have to come off as we're lowering the tank. Speaking of lowering the tank, we are now ready to remove our two fuel straps. So there is one bolt for one right there. On the other side, you can kind of see it. Oh, yep, there it is right there. And then the two in the front are much easier to access. So we're going to put a jack under the fuel tank with a piece of wood just to support its weight. And then we'll remove these one by one. I'm going to start with the two rear ones since they're a bit harder to access. Just realized I forgot to put the jack under here. That is a little bit important. Now, as we lower this down, there are two things we're going to have to watch. For one, there is another line on top of the fuel tank we need to disconnect. And then we also need to make sure that we can pry off our filler neck rubber hose. I hear some creaking over there. I want to check to make sure nothing's going to break. Okay, so I see our fuel filler neck actually popped off the whole way. So back over on the passenger side, there's one last line that we need to disconnect, and that is this line right here. You want to disconnect this now before the whole tank is down, because otherwise it might break. You can see where I have it right now. There's still a little bit of slack on it, but not a ton. So if you're struggling to get this one off like I was, this is putting a lot of strain on this line, but I actually kind of if you rotate it, it'll expose the bottom of this. So I did that, and then as it was rotated, I kind of zip tied it here just to hold it and allow it to stay rotated. And then that allowed me access to both these sides. So now it should, oh, there we go. All right, so our tank is completely free. We can slide it out now. With the tank out of the car, our next step is to remove the pump assembly from the tank. So there's a few things we need to do to complete that. The first is undo our two wiring harnesses right here. Next, we need to disconnect this big line here. And then we need to break loose our little locking ring that holds the fuel pump or the fuel basket to the fuel tank. This other one, however, is a bit different. You'll see there's a red clip on the bottom, so we need to slide that clip to the side, and then our connector comes off. Now you see I'm rotating this over, and I'm rotating it over so that way I have access to the bottom of this, because there's no way to take this out from that angle. So we need to rotate it this way and use the same method we've used on every single other one of these. Oh my gosh, I just broke. Wow, that is really bad. Well, that's really, really, really irritating. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. We're going to have to get a new one. There is a special tool you can use on this lock ring. I don't have it. What most people do is a hammer and a screwdriver like this. There we go. That popped loose. This is the charcoal canister, and it is held on by one screw on the bottom, and then it just slides in the tank. So it's very easy to remove. Problem is it's expensive, and it's also no longer available new. So I'm gonna have to source around for a used one. Probably gonna have to go to the junkyard off camera. But for now, let's get back to removing this. So we do have our pump loose. The only thing holding this basket in is this feed line right here. So this, again, very similar to all the other lines we've disconnected. It's extremely hard to get a little pry tool or something up in there to disconnect it, but just be patient and you'll be able to get it. So here's what I'm dealing with after a few minutes. It's just impossible for me to even see, so it's even harder to film, but you can see I have it most of the way off. What I'm kind of doing is sticking the flathead in between this and the top of the fuel basket, and then just gently, very, very gently prying it off very, very slowly. There's our fuel basket. I can feel and see that it has a lot of gas in it, so I'm going to give it a few minutes and hopefully get this to drain out a bit. This is our first good view of how all of this functions. You can buy just the fuel level sender if you don't want to replace the whole basket. There's some other components in here that you could check, like your fuel filter, you know, your little screener that goes on the bottom of the pump if you'd like. We're not going to do that in this video. I will put the part number on the screen for the fuel level sensor. Visibly, I don't see anything wrong with this one. So we're going to disconnect this harness, and then we'll need to de-pin the two blue wires. The sender itself is attached extremely simply, surprisingly. There is one little tab that you need to press down here, and then it slides down. The wires do hook around a little clip here, so I'm going to undo that to give us some more slack. There we go. Very simple to get that off. Now it's time to de-pin our wiring harness. So the way you want to do that is stick a small flathead and lift up on this red piece here. Within this wiring harness are little metal tabs, so if you pull that metal tab up very gently, it will allow you to slide the pin out. If you follow the pin down, you'll see that the left pin in here goes to the right wire coming out of here, coming out of that way. So important to note, I assume the direction matters on that. There's our other pin out. All right, and that is our old fuel level sender fully disconnected. All right, let's slide our new pin in. Heard a good click. That's satisfying. Another good satisfying click. Pay attention before you do this. These wires need to hook around this post if you want a clean install. I did not do that, so I need to de-pin this again. I'm going to hook these two wires in. Lastly, plug in our connector. I'm going to give these two a tug, make sure they're fully engaged. And we're good to reinstall this back in the car. Now is a great time to also replace this seal. Some of the fuel level sender kits come with new seals. I'd recommend replacing it. Mine was replaced 6 months ago when I did this job, so I'm not going to replace it again. If you haven't dropped your tank before, now is also a fantastic time to take a flashlight in there, look around. There's probably some sediment and gross buildup in there that you can kind of gently fish out. So I would recommend doing that right now as well. As we're reinstalling our pump basket, don't forget to pull this line out from the tank. There's a little cutout in the basket that it can kind of feed through right here conveniently. I figured I'd tell you all why I am not changing out my fuel pump. So you might recall in a video over the last summer, this car left me stranded in Payson, Arizona, which is about 100 miles away from where I live in Phoenix. Now the reason for that failure was the new fuel pump basket I put in. I'm saying fuel pump basket because we're not sure what the problem is. I'm going to link that video in the top corner. I'd highly recommend watching it. It was an entertaining video if you're a viewer. It was a stressful and frustrating video for me as a filmer, editor, and owner. I put a higher power Walbro pump in there. It ended up basically breaking down on me on the way up to Payson. I then had it towed home. We ended up installing a Racetronics pump from Maptune. Had the same issue. The car would not even run or idle. At this point, I was up against the clock for the owners convention, so I just decided to put my original pump back in, which is this one with the partially faulty fuel level sender, and just deal with the issue at a later date, which is right now. So I ended up initially with the idea to reinstall my new pump and fuel level sender. However, there's one of the hard plastic lines. I'll put some clips on the screen. I just could not get those hard plastic lines to work, those feed lines, as they should. And so I went through the 3 spare lines I had ordered and I could not get them to work, so I just kind of gave up. I don't really need the additional power. It would be nice to have a new fuel pump in the car. Knock on wood, this fuel pump has been fantastic, never given me any issues. So we're just going to stick with the stock pump. And so that brings us to where we're at now, which is just replacing the fuel level sender as opposed to replacing the whole basket like I had in my original video a few months back. We will clip that guy in, slide that on.
3 days later.
Our new used charcoal canister has been obtained from the junkyard. One thing I noticed, each Saab part shows one part number for the entire range of 9.3s regardless of year, engine, etc. However, these part numbers do not match. They look identical. I'm going to trust Saab parts on this. You can see the 2 part numbers there and there. So let's get this removed. Little clip for this is broken. Otherwise, you can just slide it right out of the tank pretty easily. All we need to do is access the T25 that is underneath here. And that should just lift out. I also picked up the gas tank straps from the junkyard car just because they are in such great condition. These are what mine looked like. They're not like structurally destroyed at all. They just are pretty ugly, and the underside of the car is not rusted at all, which is why I find it so odd that there's rust on those, but we got a new set of these. There's 2 things we need to do before we can jack this up. First thing is I'm going to put a little Vaseline around the lip of the feed tube, just so that way it'll help the rubber hose slide over a little better. And then secondly, we need to reconnect this line. All right, that's connected. All right, we are getting super close. All right, not going to tighten that the whole way. I want to make sure I can get the backside lined up. All right, all 4 of them are in. Let's tighten them down and then lower the jack. If you're wondering how long that took me, the camera's been rolling for about 19 minutes. So the hardest part is really just getting it centered under the jack so you can lift it up straight. The rest of this is pretty smooth sailing. We need to first screw down and tighten our filler tube hose, and everything else is just right up here in this corner. So I'm going to do this off camera because it's hard to show, and we'll come up here and finish this off. Let's start by zip tying this line right here. Before I do the 2 fuel lines, I'm going to reconnect the connector. So since we lost all fuel pressure, we need to prime the fuel pump a couple times to build pressure. So you can hear the fuel pump run. It's not going to come up on camera. One thing I'll tell you is that my fuel gauge is reading properly already, so that's a good sign. We didn't mess that up, hopefully. So I primed it 3 times. Let's see if it starts. Fired right up. Beautiful. Awesome. I say, let's take this thing for a drive, get it some gas, because we are almost in gaslight territory, and confirm that we fixed the problem. Just got some gas. Okay, I think we are good to go. We just got some gas. Not sure why my distance still empty is 25 miles. I think that'll fix itself once we get driving. Yep, there we go. It's up to 365. That is a successful fix. I hope you all found this video helpful and informative. I've got to go watch my Eagles in the NFC Championship, so I'm going to get home and get cleaned up. But thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'll see you all in the next one.
Take it easy.